I'm a data services librarian. We're going to record this talk and it'll be available later. I'll also be sharing the slides with you, so don't worry, you can always catch up later. So where are we? Data literacy for graduate students. We're going to talk a bit about core concepts in data management to support data sharing and research transparency. This is part of a 4-part workshop series. This is the first one. On Thursday, my colleague Jennifer Moore, who's on this call, is going to talk about data management. Then we have data cleaning and wrangling, and then data visualization. Again, they'll all be recorded and posted on our YouTube channel. Yeah, is there a question? They'll be recorded and posted to our YouTube channel, and I'll share with you the slides afterward if I have your email from your registration. So I'm part of the data services team, and there's 4 of us right now, with the 5th coming on board. Jennifer Moore is the head of our data services team. I'm a data curator and digital humanities librarian. Molly Webb is a data and GIS developer, specializes in R and Python. And Bill is our GIS and data visualization analyst for 3D, AR, and VR data. In the later workshops, you'll be hearing from Jennifer and Molly. So what do we do in the data services in the library? We can help you with data management, data sharing and curation, data wrangling, data literacy, data visualization, and geographic information system. So of course, today we'll focus on data literacy. But this is something, you should think about. You can always contact your subject librarian and say, I need help from data services if you forgot about us. But you can find our information on the library website. So what is data literacy? It's really about so here's what we're talking about today. What is data literacy? Sorry. Finding and evaluating data, writing data management plans, and then data sharing and ethics. So what is it? It's really, you can think about it as critical thinking skills applied to data. So it's the ability to find, evaluate, understand, analyze, and make and assess arguments that others make with data. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, it's not going to require any special coding skills. Don't worry if you don't know Python or R, or it's not going to require any special math skills or statistics. It's really about thinking about approaches to data and being a critical thinker when you encounter data or data visualizations. So why does being data literate matter? Well, when you can situate your data in context, then you can build upon it and build upon existing discoveries. If you can't, then you end up redoing work unnecessarily. When you understand data, you can interrogate it. You can understand the meaning behind the numbers. You can understand when the numbers and the arguments don't match up. And if you're not data literate, then you may be making faulty conclusions from the data arguments. Being data literate means you can design a reproducible research project. You can show your methods and data and be able to stand behind them. When you haven't, you run the risk of retraction, and no one wants that. You can make evidence-based decisions. You can argue your point with solid basis, and you can defend it. And then, when you're data literate, you can share your data with confidence. You've got good documentation. It helps you get citations to your own data, encourages confidence in your work, and contributes to the advancement of research. When you're not sharing data, you're hiding it from others, it's not very useful, and it weakens your findings. When we talk about data literacy, we're often talking about the data lifecycle. The data there's different representations of the data lifecycle. This is one we happen to use here at WashU, and it's really just a representation of the various elements for data management, use, and reuse. It typically starts at the idea stage and moves through these other stages, but what you should know is that it's not entirely sequential. You're going to revisit stages from time to time, and that's perfectly natural. So early on, sort of in your pre-project phase, you're generating an idea, you're finding collaborators, you're thinking about what you want to do. Then you're planning out your project. You're applying for funding, identifying tools or methods you're going to use, and identifying potential data sources. This is the time you're going to be writing your data management plan. We'll talk about that a bit later. Next couple of phases, really more the active stage. You're sourcing your data. You might have primary data, data collected by you, or secondary data, data collected by other people. You're going to have to figure out where you're going to store your data and keep it backed up. You're going to figure out how you're going to collaborate with other people on your data. Keep it organized so that everyone knows what data can be worked on, how to find it, how to use it. Then typically you're going to explore your data. You're going to have to combine it and prepare data for your analysis. Data never comes in the form you want to use it in. There's always a lot of pain and effort that goes in preparing your data for analysis. This is where that work happens. One rule of thumb you might sometimes hear is that 80% of the work is in data cleanup and only the 20% of the work is in analysis. And that I have found has pretty much held true. There's a lot of work in just sort of gathering and cleaning and preparing your data. But when you get there, you can start preparing results. Maybe you create a visualization that might show a graphical representation of your numbers or relationships between findings and interpret it. Maybe there's some biases. You can make inferences and help you communicate results. And then when you've completed your research, you're going to want to share your data, prepare it for long-term access and preservation, and then others can prepare to reuse your data and take it further. But let's take a step back a bit and let's talk about what is data in the first place. Really, it's any set of information that can be stored in a structured or standardized format. And it comes in a variety of forms. You can have text data, numeric data, audiovisual data, geospatial, computer code, we consider data as well, 3D data. Really, it can be anything. So if you have text data, it might be your lab notes, could be social media postings, could be survey responses, it could be literature. With survey data, maybe you're trying to understand people's preferences, emotions, or identities. Maybe there's public opinion polls. With other text data, you might use statistics about word frequency and collocation to analyze linguistic style or sentiments, or extract names and places from texts, or sort texts into topics. With numeric data, and for many of us, that's what we think of first when we think of data, are spreadsheets and tables. Maybe they're measurements from sensors or recorded in the fields. Could be tabular data used in economics or finance, word counts. And so when we have numeric data, we can do things like calculate statistics like mean and mode and variances. Maybe you're calculating average temperature or comparing average income by zip code. Then with audiovisual data, that too can be data. We don't always think about that as data, but imagery, video, sound recordings, they all contain data about both the content and the medium. Likewise, 3D data is usually 3 or more dimensions. So if you have 3D images, you can create 3D models of the Earth or 3D models of cultural objects. An ecologist might study drone imagery, identify animal habitats. Art historian might study images to identify the style of a particular artist. Those are all data as well. Geospatial data, we usually think of as maps, but really anything that is structure of objects in space, routes and distances, density, elevation, any other spatial relationship. And computer code really is data about how to run a program. And so we typically include that here too, as when we think about what is data. So this can be hard for some of you depending on what discipline you're in, but really anything can be considered data. The key point is that it's structured in some form or fashion that is computer readable. So when we talk about human readable data, versus machine readable data, that's typically what we're getting at. Machine readable data must be structured to be read easily into by the computer. So a PDF, human readable data, a PDF with tables in it, well, you have to somehow extract those tables, put them into a spreadsheet, some other form of data like that to get the computer to then process them. Here's an example of a receipt that's readable by humans, but a little bit more complicated for a computer to read. Your cash register at the coffee shop might give the receipt to the human, but behind the scenes, it's adding data to a database that's going to say, okay, this many orders of coffee at this price, at this, here's the tax, here's the day, so I can understand, okay, more pizza is ordered on Fridays than on other days. Those kinds of things where you wouldn't want to just sort of rifle through. If you're the restaurant owner, you wouldn't want to just read all of your receipts one by one to extract that data. You want to look at something like a database or a spreadsheet. Common machine readable formats are the CSV, a spreadsheet, JSON, or XML, but there are many, many more. Those are just some of the more common ones. And a lot of things are both. I mean, a spreadsheet can sometimes be a bit obtuse and hard for humans to read, but we can read it. And it is also, of course, computer readable. So why do we care about using machine readable formats? Well, machines can store large volumes of data relatively cheaply. And when we store it that way, it makes it a lot easier to share and reuse both with other humans and with other machines. So if you think back to, lab notebooks of 100 years ago that were handwritten, well, it's a lot harder to share that information across the scientific community. But now we have spreadsheets, we give them DOIs, we can share them with anybody instantaneously. And then, of course, our computational tools can process large volumes of data that are difficult and time-consuming for humans to process at all. And then the machines can also help us find hidden patterns that we might have otherwise missed. So there are different types of data. These are the two biggest differences are quantitative and qualitative data. So quantitative data is what you might think, things that can be measured with numbers, like duration or speed. Qualitative data is descriptive or categorical. So it might be things like survey responses or your eye color. They're not always, they can't be counted in some way. So qualitative data, I'm sticking with the right side of the slide for now, is commonly divided into two subtypes. We have nominal data, and this is sometimes called categorical data. So these are like categories like eye color or hair color, where there's no ranking associated with them. I mean, we can argue about who has better eye color, but really there's no sort of ranking associated with them, where ordinals have a kind of a rank to them, like a survey data, 1 through 5, how do you rank this item? On the left side, back to quantitative data, commonly divided into discrete and continuous data, which is to say that discrete data is basically, your whole numbers. So 1, 2, 3, your integers. And continuous can be a little bit broken down. This is a little tricky, not always that important to understand the difference because you can always sort of add decimal points and make things continuous. But understand sort of that the big picture difference is between quantitative and qualitative, because what that does is it really can determine what you can then do with your data. Some trickier questions is think about zip codes for a sec. They're numeric data, so sometimes it's easy to say, oh, they're quantitative, but just because they're made up of numbers does not mean it's quantitative. Zip codes are, they're in fact categories, nominal data. And so in fact would count as qualitative data. And an easy way to sort of grasp that is to say, Well, it doesn't make sense to sum up a column of zip codes. It doesn't make sense to take an average of zip codes. That should tell us that, oh, just because it's made up of numbers doesn't mean it's a quantitative data type. Likewise, colors are generally considered categorical or nominal data, but if you're a scientist, say researching the color spectrum, and you're seeing numbers like this RGB code for red, it could be, in your particular case, it could be that the numbers you're using to represent colors are in fact quantitative. So I don't want to pretend that some of this qualitative versus quantitative is really easy, or that the same answer applies all the time. Depends what you're researching. It's more that I want to sort of place this thought in your mind for issue spotting as you're going about preparing your data sets. Think about what kind of data this is. Does it make sense for the analysis that you want to do? So why? So with quantitative data, you can do things like mean, median, mode, range, calculate standard deviation, those kinds of things. That makes sense for numeric data. But those measures you can't use with qualitative data. It doesn't make sense to take like, what's the average eye color of Americans? That doesn't really make sense. But you can do things like frequency tables. You can do things like sort alphabetically, but sorting by high to low might not make much sense. Okay, so now we're going to move on to where you can find data and how to evaluate the data that you found. The library's put together a research guide about common data sources from around the world and different subjects, but you can always reach out to your subject librarian or data services directly for help finding data. The other place you can look is the Registry of Research Data Repositories. So this is a aggregator site that lists out disciplinary repositories that you could go find places to look. Again, there can be stuff in a generalist repository or disciplinary one. It's not sort of as easy to find these things because it can be all over the place. That's a good place to start. Other places to look, there are data set aggregators. So you're all familiar with Google, probably familiar with Google Scholar. There's also Google Dataset Search. So that's searching just for data sets. Data.gov is also help you search for US government data across all departments. And then there are generalist repositories that you may have encountered already. Figshare, Zenodo, Harvard Dataverse, and Dryad are some of the biggest. And then there's disciplinary repositories. I've only listed a few here. ICPSR is a huge one for political, social work, public policy. NIH databases, the NCBI databases, big wealth of information there as well. So there are lots of places to look, but if you do need help, feel free to reach out to your librarians. There are also other ways to find data. Government agencies, NGOs, private industry groups, and researchers. And as you're looking through stuff, look at scholarly articles. They should, if they're relying on data, they too should be making it available. And if they're not, feel free to email the author and ask for a copy. Government reports. And then we talk about gray literature. So these are things like NGOs and businesses sort of outside of academic research, maybe. Think someone like the Red Cross or something like that, where they're producing white papers and data. Just, go directly to their website and see what they have. Now, having said that, you're not just going to go download anything you see on the web. How can you sort of evaluate data, determine if it's authoritative? So typically, you want to look at an established research entity of some kind. Again, academia, government, an established NGO. They will typically have a high degree of reliability. The next thing you're going to want to do is, do you have the right to reuse the data? They will typically have a license associated with sometimes, often a Creative Commons license, but also look to see if there's any restrictions on confidentiality or resharing or commercial use. ICPSR, for example, has a lot of social science data, often has a lot of confidentiality restrictions associated with it. So again, read the license, understand what in fact you can do with it. Take a look at the documentation. Good data sets come with good documentation. If there's not good documentation around it, how can you tell if it's a reliable source? You can't. So maybe it's not something you can use in your research. So look at the source, purpose, and method of collection. Look at the descriptions of the variables in use and the units of measure. Do they say temperature and they don't specify Celsius or Fahrenheit? Well, how can you use that data? Look at the file directory and the file inventory. Identify the processes involved in data cleanup and analysis. They should explain, are they throwing out outliers, or are they including them in their data set? Understand sort of what they're giving you. You'll typically encounter 3 types of documentation. There are README files, data dictionaries, and code books. And I'm not going to go over them too much this time because we'll talk about that in the data management workshop. So you'll learn more about them, but here's some resources you can follow up next time. But generally speaking, README files, you see them a lot with, it's basically metadata or data about the data. So it's a description of the data collection and variable names. A data dictionary you often find in it includes the list of fields in the name and what they mean, and a lot of times the precision and range of values that would be allowed. And then code books you see a lot in survey data. So if you've ever used REDCap can actually generate a code book for you, and helps explain what are possible survey responses and the range of responses. So you found an authoritative source, you've reviewed the data documentation. What are you looking for in that data documentation? Well, look at some motivation and bias of the researchers. Who's paying for the study? Is this Coca-Cola paying for taste tests between Coke and Pepsi? Are only successful trials being published? What about the null results? Are those getting published? Double check yourself and your own confirmation bias. We have a tendency to actively search for information that matches our preconceived and ideas and beliefs. Are you disregarding data that doesn't conform to your hypothesis, and not critically evaluating data that does conform? Take a look at the collection sample. Does the population size make sense? If this is survey data, how was recruitment carried out? Was the data collected ethically? Were proper permissions obtained? Then take a look at the variables. Do you understand the units of measure? Do you understand the level of measurements? So what I'm saying there is, you're hunting for county level data and all you found is state level data. Well, maybe you have to keep hunting because you need county level data, not state level data. Or maybe you're going to have to rethink your project and be able to deal with state level data instead. Take a look to see if there's any missing data. Are there gaps? Is it okay that there are gaps, or are those really problematic for what you want to do? Understand raw versus proportional values. Understand the margin of error. Too large is not going to be that useful for you. Again, folks in data services can sort of help you find and evaluate data sources like this. So you found one that you like, you're going to reuse it in your paper. How can you cite it? Data sources are getting better at offering, suggesting a citation for you, but they don't always. So when you do, just create your own keep these things in mind. You're always going to include the author or creator, which might be a person, but it might be an organization, the date of publication, which might not be the date of collection, a title or a brief description, the publisher, which is really like the entity who's sharing that data, and a DOI of some kind, unique identifier if it's online. Especially for data that has more than one edition or version, make sure to include the version you're using. And it's often helpful to include the file format as well, so people can access it themselves. Here are some data citation examples from DataCite. Really, the important thing is use the citation style appropriate to your discipline. So your discipline might have different rules about author full name or where the date goes. But generally speaking, as long as you keep these 5 things in mind, you're good to go. And just like any other citation and plagiarism rule, you're going to cite data just like you cite anything else. Okay, so I've alluded a bit to data management plans. So you've got this research idea, you've started collecting your data, you're applying for funding, and the application asks for a data management plan. So what do you do? Well, data management in general facilitates data reuse. Data sharing is often required by funders. And so if you have a data management plan, you're prepared to comply with funder requirements, and it really, frankly, makes your life much easier. You really should be thinking about this regardless of whether your funding source requires it. And you should really be thinking about data management, even if you're the sole researcher on the project. It's just going to make your life easier. So think about, just think about your email inbox or your box folder or your photos on your phone. When they're not organized, it's a lot of pain to make them organized. So start thinking about how you're organizing your research files. The sooner the better. And it also pays to sort of revisit it as your research takes shape. So what is a data management plan? Generally speaking, it's going to ask these questions, or you're going to answer these questions in your plan. What are you collecting? How will you store it? How's it organized? Are you collaborating with anyone? How are you documenting your processes? How are you protecting it? And how are you going to share it? So why do you want to develop it? Well, it makes it easier to access and understand your data, both now and in the future. So 6 months from now, having put your project aside to do something else, you come back to it, you want to understand it. If you've written things down, it makes it a lot easier. If you're working in a lab, it makes it much easier to hand off to a new person so that they can pick up where you left off. Helps maintain data integrity and reduce the risk of lost, stolen, or misused data. That's the last thing we want, is to lose our data and years of work. It also facilitates validation of results and reproducibility. Facilitates sharing, greater collaboration, greater research impact when people are citing your data. And it really reduces the time to write up your research results for publication. Some of this stuff might be tedious at the beginning, but really it does save time in the long run. So resources for data management plans. There's something called the DMP tool that we have a subscription to it, and it helps you create a plan for specific funders using some boilerplate language, and we can help you with that. So I'm going to walk through here. Here's where you can start off with the plan, and you just log in with your WSTL email to get started, and you'll see a dashboard right off the bat with some links to resources help filling out the form. So you'll select the research organization, that's WashU, the funding organization, because each funder has quirky little rules, and it'll help you fill them out. Describe your project, select your funding organization and division, describe the expected data you're going to collect and produce. And then here we have archiving with the WashU data repository. We've developed some boilerplate language so that you can share with your funders to say, this is where we plan to put our data. It will be given a DOI. This is an accepted research repository where we plan to share. We use the DataCite metadata schema. So DataCite is what we use to mint our DOIs. And that gives them, then the library takes on a promise to store that data so that it will be available for future researchers. So then at the end of it, you've prepared your data management plan. You can request feedback from data services about its completeness, and we'll have to give you feedback, and then it's ready to produce. Okay, so now we'll move on to data sharing and ethics. So you've prepared the data management plan, you've finished your research, you're about to publish your journal article. You now need to share the supporting data. Data sharing is a responsibility of good academic research. Your funders, as we mentioned already, your funders are requiring it, your journals are requiring it, research communities more generally are requiring it. And the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy is also requiring it. So broadly speaking, data should be publicly deposited in a data repository, and it can be an institutional one like the WashU one, a disciplinary one like ICPSR, or a generalist depository like Figshare with a persistent identifier like a DOI and robust metadata. So this Office of Science and Technology Policy from the White House has issued some policy guidance, really promoting increasing equitable access to federally funded research. The idea being, taxpayer dollars are going towards this research, then the output of this research should not be hidden behind paywalls, should not be hidden in researchers' laptops. The output of this research should be publicly available promptly. So underlying peer-reviewed scholarly publications resulting from federally funded research should be made freely available and publicly accessible by default at the time of publication. There are provisions for sensitive data, but the default position is that things should be publicly accessible at the time of publication. So sharing data, a couple considerations. Studies have shown that the public are more likely to trust data that's openly available. So it does make a big difference to researchers to say, you're open and transparent about what your research you've done and made it available. That makes your data more trustworthy. When you share data, it makes it possible to reuse it. But of course, you do need to have good documentation to make sure people can evaluate how good your data is. Helps with data review, helps with peer review. You'll get a persistent identifier, typically a DOI. People can reproduce your data. There are ways to protect your sensitive data. And Jennifer will talk about that in the data management workshop. And typically aim to achieve fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So when we talk about making data fair, findable means putting it in an acceptable data repository like the ones we've talked about here. It doesn't mean putting it on your research lab website. That's not a data repository. Must go in a proper data repository and get a DOI. Accessible, well, make it available during a permissive license to reuse. Interoperable, we'll put it in a format that works with many tools. Preferably an open format, not a proprietary format. So we always talk about using CSV files rather than Excel files. And reusable. So you've described it well, provided with good metadata, that's going to make it more reusable. So where can you deposit data? WashU has its own data repository for self-submission, and we in data services curate those data before depositing, and give you feedback on its fairness, and then we publish it with metadata and give it a DOI. You can get a DOI from us when you deposit it in our repository. If for some reason you're not depositing with us, but you need a DOI, contact us to talk about alternatives. And you can also publish in disciplinary repositories or other general repositories like Figshare, Zenodo. You can find those with R3 data. And again, we can help consult about where's the most appropriate place to deposit them. And we're also happy to curate data and give you feedback on your data management, regardless of whether you're depositing the data with us or not. So generally speaking, so I'm in the Olin libraries, but we work with our colleagues in Becker as well. So those of you who might be on the med school side, we work together on this thing, but here are some resources all sort of coming together really under OVCR as well, who talk about research data. But as far as services we can provide, we can help you with repository selection. We can review your data and documentation, suggest on recommendations on how to improve the fairness of your data, help you prepare a README or other data documentation that accompanies your data, help you find and evaluate data sets. Whatever you might need on the score, that's where we can help you. So I guess I raced through that. I think I was talking too fast, but we can open this up for question then. Here are data services contacts for the Danforth campus and the medical campus, and feel free to chime in if you have any questions. And if the don't have any questions, we can end early.
Sarah, there was a question earlier about what boilerplate language is, and I just mentioned it's standard language that you can use, but if you want to talk more about it.
Right. So I think I mentioned boilerplate in the data management plan. So really it's pre-drafted existing language that you can cut and paste essentially into your data management plan. So in that particular example, we're talking about the WashU data repository and how it meets the terms, the funder's terms, because we promise to make things available. We give things a DOI, and we have expectations for a minimum amount of metadata to accompany it. So that's all that means. All right, well, thanks for coming, and feel free to reach out as you go on your research journey. We're happy to help.
Bye.